Hello, Wealth Masters. My name is Greg Phelps, and I am your host to the Wealth Summit. Our mission here at the Summit is simple. We want to educate and empower you with actionable tools, tips, and tactics to help you grow, protect, and maximize your personal wealth. Today, we've got a very interesting guest. We've got Mike Gary with Yardley Wealth Management, and Mike is going to discuss some of the important factors on determining when you retire, whether you should actually take the pension annuity or actually a lump sum rollover. So it's very important that you all kind of stay tuned and get ready to take some notes and learn. Mike, are you ready to help us master our wealth?
I'm ready, Greg. Thanks for having me.
All right, a little bit about Mike. Mike's been married for 20 years. He and his wife have 3 daughters. He's coached several of his daughters' Yardley Makefield Soccer, YMS, and YMCA soccer and basketball teams. And he has completed the Philadelphia Marathon, the Philadelphia Distance Run, the Broad Street Run, the American Cancer Society Bike-a-thon, and the Philadelphia and Marsh Creek Triathlons. He recently finished the Quakerman Half Triathlon, which is a 71-mile race, 1.2-mile swim, 56.7-mile bike, and a 13.1-mile run, winning the Clydesdale, which is men over 200 pounds, which is where I'd be right there with you if I could keep up with you, Mike. Mike, that's pretty impressive. Myself, I do, a half marathon here or there, or a mountain bike race, cross country, but that is impressive. So kudos to you, sir.
Well, thanks. The good thing about winning the Clydesdale division in the 71-mile race, there aren't a lot of us. I don't know if any others finished that time. Actually, no other Clydesdale did finish that race. And I asked the guy afterwards, do I still get a trophy for that? It seems kind of silly. He's like, 1 of 1 is the win, my man. Here you go.
Well, congratulations. So, Mike, is there anything else that I missed in your bio you'd like to take a second to just kind of fill in any blanks?
No, I have a book out. It's a few years, Independent Financial Planning. It's published in 2014. People can find that on Amazon, or the links are on our website. It's on how to find and work with an independent financial planner, a fiduciary, someone to look after put your interests first, not a salesperson.
Okay, great. So check that out on Amazon. What was the name of it again?
Independent Financial Planning, your ultimate guide to finding and choosing the right financial planner.
There you go, and I'm sure you can go on Amazon and type in Michael Gary, Garry, and find it as well.
Yep.
So, all right, Mike. So what we're going to discuss today is a pretty critical decision, and it's a decision that you can't take back if you get it wrong. And what we're talking about specifically is when you leave your employer, a lot of times you'll have the option where you can take an annuity payment over the rest of your life. And that annuity payment may come, typically it's a monthly payment, and it might have a benefit to your spouse or a partial benefit to your spouse if you die. So the decision really is about whether you take the annuity or the lump sum and take the entire chunk of cash. So I'm going to just turn this over to you, Mike, and just kind of share with us a little bit about what the different nuances of this decision are and what does it mean to us.
Sure. So we get a lot of people come in and they're given that choice, and the choice is whether to take a lump sum or to take one of the many annuity options. And so the option might be just on their own life or the life of them and their spouse. And there could be multiple choices as far as whether the spouse gets the same amount or half or 3/4. And some even have what they call Social Security leveling, where you get a bigger benefit until you're age 62 and then a smaller one then, so that Social Security and your benefit work together to provide you that monthly income. And I think people come in with the idea that they could kind of game the system, like, well, what's the best choice? Like, where am I getting the most money? And as you know, there is no right answer. All those choices are actuarially equivalent. The company that provides the pension, knows your date of birth, your spouse's date of birth, your life expectancies and interest rates, and they plug those all in so that they know what the pension costs them across their entire pension obligation, and then they could guess pretty closely what that's going to be. But for you or me, if we're faced with that option, we won't know which will have been the option where we make the most money until we're both dead. And so you can't go back in time and figure that out. So what that means is there's no one right answer. It really depends on your own personal circumstances and how you feel about things. Your risk tolerance plays a lot into it, and really your life.
Okay. All right, and so, like you said, it's one of these things where the annuity company takes your age and your mortality when they think you're going to die actuarially, current interest rates in the environment, and then they kind of determine, okay, this payment makes sense for you, and you can either take the payment or the lump sum. So if you've got $1 million, that payment maybe who knows what it is, maybe it's $3,000 a month, or you take this lump sum and now you've got $1 million in a pension plan. So these are two critical components of your ultimate retirement plan. And while there's no right or wrong answer, Mike, there's got to be some critical decision factors that we should be thinking about, right?
Sure. So you need to figure out like your own individual situation, right? And well, hopefully we all know our individual situation, and think about like what's important to us, right? So if you take the lump sum, there's big benefits there in terms of you get the money up front and you have a lot of choice and you have a lot of freedom. But with that freedom comes responsibility because you can't mess it up because you're not going to get another. It's not like a pension where you spend too much and you get the next month you get another check.
Right.
So you take into consideration your mortality, like if you think you're going to live shorter or longer than the pension company might think, your family circumstances in terms of you have other income coming in or not, your experience or access to good investment advice or financial planning advice. All these things are things to put into the mix of what choice should you make? What's the smart thing for you?
Okay. And so in terms of taking a lump sum, let's just say that I think I want to take a lump sum. I'm not 100% certain. What are some reasons or what are some life circumstances where a lump sum might be advantageous as opposed to an annuity?
Sure. Well, one thing one circumstance where a lump sum makes a lot of sense is if you are experienced as an investor and you know how to manage your money or you have access to a good quality advisor who can help you with that decision. Another one is if you have a situation where your cash flow is uneven, and so say you need more money now or less money now. With the pension option, you will get a certain amount every month, and that won't change. If you get the lump sum and say you have a tough cash flow for a year because your spouse has lost their job or has had to retire sooner, or you have other access to money and you don't need it, and if you don't need that money coming in, you could just take that lump sum, put it in your IRA, not pay any taxes on it, and wait to distribute it when you need it. So you could time the timing of the distributions and then the taxes. I mean, so those are the big things I think.
So Mike, there's two sides of that spectrum, I think, from what I'm hearing you say, is if you're going to have a big cash need early in retirement, maybe that doesn't correspond with your monthly payments, you might want to take a lump sum because you'll have more flexibility. And conversely, if you have no cash needs, you might not want the annuity payments. You just want to let your money grow for you. So there's two sides of the coin.
Right. Now that's an interesting take on it. So maybe if if your cash flow need is something that is more of a normal or you have an even flow, it might make more sense to take the annuity payment then, because then you could time those distributions with what your needs are. And if you're on either end of the spectrum in terms of cash flow, rich or poor at the time, it might be better to take the lump sum and adjust so that it fits better within your particular circumstances.
Okay. And you also mentioned one of the consideration points is if you have access to a professional money manager or investment advisor, somebody you trust who's hopefully a fiduciary, like I know you are, Mike. So if you have that access, having a lump sum where you can manage it yourself in conjunction with your overall retirement plan might be advantageous. And if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is when I get the annuity, the pension payments, there's no more managing. It's just on autopilot. I get nothing else to do with it.
Right. No, that's right. For good and bad. You don't have to worry about doing anything, and then you don't have to worry about messing up or bad markets or your advisor putting in the wrong things. You get the pension plan, the pension amounts. Yeah, that's what you get. No more, no less.
And you mentioned something really interesting there, so I want to kind of follow up on that. Bad markets, which is I think every retiree, they're just that's the biggest fear. I cannot live through this. I've got to make this last. And if a client or an individual has that perception about investing and they're just got a wall up, maybe the annuity payments from the pension are the best option.
Right, right. Yeah, if someone is going to have a 30-year retirement filled with stress and worry that they're going to mess up their retirement, or that the market's going to be bad, or sometimes people just feel unlucky with that stuff. Well, then you know what? Take the annuity, and you'll know what you're going to have. There's pros and cons with both of them, both options, and so not only does it need to make financial sense for you, but you need to go to sleep at night. And that's a real thing.
Mike, real quick, offline a little bit, one thing, or not offline, but, off the beaten path of our discussion here, one thing that's really interesting is, and I don't think this exists, maybe you can clarify, when you have a 401k, you're going to retire and roll this over, and they give you these two options. It's black or white. Why don't they have a gray option? Maybe I got $1 million 401k, and I need $200,000 that I want to roll over and then do the rest as the annuity, but that doesn't exist today, does it?
Not that I'm aware of, no. That might be a nice little instead of this big either or irreversible decision. It might be nice to be able to do that. Take part.
Yeah, because then that would help smooth out some of those cash flow I need it or I don't need it issues as well. Okay.
Right. I guess you could roll it over into an IRA and then buy an annuity with part of it. Then you would just have a more expensive annuity than if it was just a straight annuity through your pension plan.
Right. Right, and it would be a more expensive annuity because I'm buying it myself versus having this buying power of this gigantic economies of scale for my 401k.
Right.
Okay.
And while people think, oh, well, it only costs you a little bit more, that little bit more could really add up over time. So it would be nice if there was that third option instead of like the either or. All
right. Well, maybe we can go to Capitol Hill and get that done. What do you say, Mike?
Because a lot of stuff's getting done on Capitol Hill these days.
Yeah, right. All right. So, Mike, I do have access to professional management and institutional no-load mutual funds and all this fun stuff, and it's in the part of my overall retirement plan. So I think I want to do the lump sum, but tell me a little bit about the pros and cons. What am I going to face if I take this lump sum?
Sure. So some of the big pros in taking the lump sum, one thing that we haven't touched on yet is that the money can outlive you. So if you take the lump sum and you roll it into your IRA and you and your spouse die early, that money is still in your IRA and can go to your other beneficiaries, whether they're kids or grandkids or anybody else. If you take the pension, when you and your spouse die, depending on what you elect on the pension goes with you. So that's it. So I think that is a prime consideration there, especially when you're talking sometimes about really large amounts of money. Yeah. I know that those large amounts of money would also translate into pretty large monthly pension amounts, but a lot of times that would sway the lump sum for me or for a client in that decision.
Right, because what you're saying is if I take this pension and I got $1 million, and now all of a sudden my $1 million is gone. It is at the insurance company, and they're just got this promise to pay me every month, and maybe my spouse gets a portion or a whole share of it as well if I die. But that $1 million is gone. So if my spouse and I, on our 65th, birthdays or whatever, we go out and fly somewhere, and we plane doesn't land, that money is gone. That $1 million is wiped out for my heirs.
Right.
That's
yeah,
a big
it's a big consideration.
Yep.
And so that's part of the whole decision making, is your family. So if you aren't concerned, if you're ready to retire and that you're thinking about the lump sum or the pension, one of the things that would lead you more towards the pension is if you don't have beneficiaries, right? If you're just going to leave it to charity or to nieces or nephews, which comes up a lot. People are childless or outlive their children. People are living so long on their own these days. We see quite a few people who don't have beneficiaries that it's vital that the next generation gets it.
Okay. And I suppose, Mike, here's one way, because these pension annuities, when they're offered when I retire, they're not offered with what we would call a period certain, are they? They're just for your life.
Right.
And so what I mean by period certain, wealth masters out there, is a lot of times when you get a private annuity, if I go out and I just want an annuity and I want a stream of income paid to me, they will give you the option of a somewhat reduced monthly payment, but they'll guarantee you if you die within 10 years or so that your heirs will at least get those 10 years of payments. That does not exist when you take a pension annuity. They don't have any of those guarantees back. So that's, I guess,
Right.
one possible way that the individual annuity might be a little bit better.
Right. Right. No, that's a good thought.
Okay. And so going back to the pros and cons of actually doing a lump sum, kind of let's circle back there and talk a little bit more about what are some of the negatives.
Well, the negative with the lump sum is a pretty big negative. If you spend too much, or you have you make bad choices with your investments, or the market is just particularly bad, and you are too aggressive, let's say, in your choices, you could lose it. You could lose a big chunk of it. One of the times we see people, who are not professional investors, will take that lump sum and they'll roll it over and they'll come into the office here and we'll look at their IRA and they'll think they've done a good job of diversifying, but they've bought like 5 large cap growth funds. And
Right.
if the market goes down by half, their accounts are going to go down by half. And all of a sudden, that $1 million is $500,000, and then that $40,000 or $45,000 a year distribution you want to make becomes really sketchy, becomes really hard to do. And like the other things that are irreversible in this, that's something you can't go back and say, oh, I messed up. Let me take that again. And I think that's a big part of why people are so nervous about taking the lump sum, or why people take the annuity probably more often than I think would or should. I think because there's a real fear there, whether they do something that messes it up, or circumstances outside their control. It's just a bad market. You retire and it's July of 2008 and everything seems just hunky dory, and then 2 months later everything hits the fan and things are bad.
Right.
So yeah, that's
a big con.
Yeah, it's a big con.
That's a big con to taking the lump sum. Is you have that personal risk, and now it's up to you you and your advisor to make the right decisions. And I guess I would like to emphasize here, there are ways that you can plan around some of these negative points in the market and reduce a lot of risk, right, Mike?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, so if someone is retiring and they're rolling over a lump sum into an IRA, I'm not going to have them all in stocks unless the rest of their situation dictates that. So we'll look at what their overall risk tolerance is, how the rest of their situation lines up, so that it blends in nicely, to fit in with their income and their other assets. So it's not, wouldn't be buying 5 large cap growth funds, no matter what it is. It would be some sort of diversification.
You diversify the overall plan, the overall portfolio.
Right.
And probably have some liquid reserves to weather the storm as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I mean, for us, for a typical retired person comes in, they're usually between 50 and 60 or 65% in stock funds, and the rest in bond funds and cash. And the bond funds that we use are short and intermediate term, and they're investment grade. So you're not going to get giant yields from them, but they do nicely when the stock market tanks. And
Right.
So if someone's taking 4 or 5% of their portfolio out a year, and because they're in their 60s. There's typically 8, 10, 12 years worth of pretty safe money in bond funds and cash to weather those storms. So the big con of the lump sum doesn't have to be.
Right.
All too often it is, but it really doesn't have to be.
It really boils down to whether you've got a really good plan in place.
Yeah. No, that's it.
And then you have to have the fortitude to stick with it. That's the hard part.
Right.
Okay. So Mike, let's kind of switch gears a little bit, and let's just talk about what are some of the annuity considerations that we need to be thinking about when making this decision.
Sure. So in making a decision towards the annuity, I think the biggest thing is if you're really unsure and you don't know what to do, and you're not sure that you have any availability of good advice or planning, I think that would be something that would lead you towards the annuity. I think that would make sense. If you're a particularly nervous person and you have a hard time and the stock market bothers you, and it's something that you just can't get out of your head, I've run into people like that really struggle with it. It's not just a little bit of nervousness during times of turbulence, but an all-encompassing thing. But then, take the annuity and don't think about it again. It's just a choice. It's not like a moral thing or immoral thing. Sometimes people get they get the sense that they read a lot, they follow podcasts, they look online and they think, well, these are the things I should be doing. And the thing is, no. Those things might make sense for the vast majority of people, or even a simple majority of people. But you need to do what makes sense for you and what will lead you to be successful. And if you are getting the lump sum and constantly second guessing and up all night worried about it, that's not a good outcome. The better outcome is to take the monthly check and just forget about it.
Okay. And as we had already discussed, I mean, one of the big pros for annuities is you really don't have to worry about making investment decisions at all. It's just taken care of for you.
Right. Yeah. It's only spending decisions. Make sure you spend less than what the annuity is, and Social Security and other options, and that's it. Yeah.
Okay. And what are some of the downsides?
Yeah. So that's the risk, right? But the downsides with taking the annuity, I think the biggest one is that the money is not adjusted, for inflation. And so if you take the annuity, if something happens to you and your spouse, then the money is gone. And money, if you live a long time, while that might seem like something that's a pro for annuity, right? If you live longer than the insurance company would expect you, you miss out on those extra payments, let's say. But your money's not adjusted for inflation, and even relatively modest inflation can really erode your purchasing power. You have 2.2% a year inflation, which is higher than we have now. Well, after a decade, you've lost a quarter of your purchasing power. And somebody's making that decision in their 60s. They have a life expectancy of another 20 or 25 years. For a married couple, it's more likely that one of them will get to 90 than not. That's a lot of purchasing power.
Right.
I go back to my wife's grandfather was a captain in the fire department, and when he retired in the early 70s, his pension was like $6,000 a year, and that was like 75% of his salary at the time.
Wow.
Well, he died after the turn of the millennium. $6,000 really didn't buy that much anymore. And that's now. We're not likely to have periods with as high inflation as we did in the 70s and 80s, but it could happen. It's
Right.
already happened, so it could certainly happen again. It's just something to keep in mind.
Right. And so when you retire today and you take your $3,000 a month payment, and in 15 years, when you go to buy a car and the car costs, 20, 30, 40% more than it does today, you still got the same $3,000 a month to work with. That's a big problem.
Right. Yeah, you need. So that's the thing. So Social Security is adjusted for inflation, but if you have really no other assets, you really will eventually your lifestyle will erode based on inflation, and whether it will erode quickly or slowly depends on how fast inflation is. But that's a big consideration. It's funny though. So we said that like 4 or 5 times. These are big considerations, and so it really boils down to what are the things that you can live with, and what can't you live with, and what's the right decision for you.
Okay.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. And so, Mike, I just want to circle back real quick. When we talk about the pension and the annuity and no inflation raises, we're talking specifically about a private for-profit company, right?
Right.
Because with the public service, I know here in Nevada with our PERS, they get actually very generous inflation raises, but that's not common in the private world.
Right. Right.
And in fact, to kind of piggyback off of that, these pensions aren't common anymore. I mean, you just don't see them that much. I think a lot of times they just want to get rid of you, get you out of the system, and move on.
Yeah, a lot of the ones that we see have either been frozen for a while. In this neck of the woods, there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and so they still, some of them still have them going strong. Some of them have closed them off for new hires, and sometimes they've was stopped as of a certain date. That's typically in this area who we see them with.
Okay. All right, all right. So, Mike, here's what I kind of want to transition to and I know we already discussed this. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no hard or fast rule, but these are some really big points to just drive home making your decision. And in terms of the lump sum, what are some of those main things? Just kind of circle back and reiterate.
Yes, so I would take the lump sum when you feel confident in your investing, or you have access to good investment advice. I would take the lump sum when my cash flow is at odds with the distribution rate of the pension, whether I need more or less money at the time. I would take the lump sum if I was very interested in the next generation of my family or other beneficiaries getting access to that cash if something were to happen to me and or me and my spouse. I think those are the biggest reasons I would take the lump sum.
Okay. And then, to kind of piggyback, this is going to transition us into when you really want to take the annuity. And I'm going to ask you just flat out why this matters and let you elaborate. But when you say that when interest rates are relatively low, a lump sum might be a better option. Explain to me why.
Sure. Because when your company and whoever administers their pension plan is figuring out what your benefit is going to be, your benefit is higher, the lump sum or the payments, when interest rates are low. So if you have interest rates low now, like they are now, you can lock in that lump sum payment. If we fast forward 10 years and interest rates are normal, if we go back 10 years and they're normal, that lump sum would have been lower.
Okay, gotcha. So the interest rates affect your annuity payments, and that's got to be taken into consideration as well.
Right.
And if correct me if I'm wrong if I get this backwards, but when they calculate the annuity payments, they take your current age, your mortality. So let's just say you're going to live another 20 years. They say, hey, you've got $1 million, so we've got $1 million to work with. And the insurance company says, because even if you get it up privately or through your 401k provider, the insurance company says, hey, you're going to live 20 years. Interest rates are this. We can earn this amount of money with your $1 million, so we're going to guarantee that we'll pay you X dollars. So if interest rates are higher, so right now let's just say that rates are 3%, and if interest rates are double that, 6%, then the insurance company, they look at that and say we could make a little bit more on your $1 million, so your annuity payment would be higher. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one of those things to think about when getting an annuity, whether it's through your pension or privately as well. Interest rates right now are relatively low, right, Mike?
Right. Yeah, they're pretty low.
Yeah, so it's probably not the best time to get an annuity in any form.
Right.
Or at least a better way to say that is it's one notch possibly against taking the annuity. You've still got to take in all the other considerations.
Right. Yeah, there are so many other considerations, and that's one of them, and that's a big thing. Yeah, that interest rates are low. They are higher than they were, and they probably will get higher. It's certainly a long road towards higher interest rates.
Anecdotally, Mike, I interviewed Vanguard for the Wealth Summit as well, and they had some of their market experts and global economics and prognosticators, even though they don't really prognosticate so much. But they were basically saying that interest rates are low, and GDP is low, and it's stable, and it's probably rates. We're going to see low rates and low inflation for many, many years to come. So whether it's true or not, they're predicting, but who knows? It's interesting, to think about.
Right. No, it is interesting. Yeah, and it's also you can't help but notice how many how oftentimes like the prognosticators will just take whatever the most recent thing is and say, oh, this is going to go into the future. It's really hard to predict some sort of a change, and then I guess the other thing is when people say some really major change, they kind of look at them usually as like there's some sort of a crank or they're just out there trying to get their name for it. So I guess it's hard to be the prognosticator for sure.
Yeah.
Because people like me will just say that they're probably going to be wrong no matter what they say.
Mike, I don't buy that for a second. You told me offline you had a crystal ball.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. So let's kind of focus on the annuity. Again, the reasons to take the annuity, and then we'll talk about whether you should roll or keep your 401k.
Okay. So the big thing with the annuity, you want a stable income. You don't either want to or can't handle the turbulence of the stock market.
I see
It's
that a
not
lot.
that, yeah, yeah. Like I said, I think that more people choose it than necessarily might for financial reasons. But I think that that's a big thing. They don't want the risk. They're afraid of messing up their retirement. And that's the biggest thing. I think the other things are all really incidental to that. You
Mhm.
know, if your anticipated cash flow needs work out with the timing of the annuity, then that's good. Or another thing, that I was just thinking about now is if maybe you're okay, but maybe your spouse is not great with finances, and typically, I'd say 90% of the cases here, one spouse does most financial things, and the other one comes along for the ride most times, because they feel like they should. But if you have a pretty good idea of what you think you should be doing, but you're not confident that your spouse would, or your spouse wouldn't know what to do, maybe that would be another reason to take the annuity. Say,
Right.
listen, if something happens to me, you're just going to get the same amount, or 3/4, or whatever it is. You can figure that out with what your anticipated cash flow needs are.
Hmm. No, absolutely. That's a great point, Mike. And I think about my situation, and well, we do have other advisors in the office that would help my wife if something happened to me and if I wasn't in this position. I think it would probably be more advantageous to her to have that stability of income and cash flows. Just
Right?
kind of depends.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It really is a personal situation.
Yep. So, Mike, let's talk a little bit about. I mean, this whole discussion is predicated on leaving your employment for the last time, and you've got this 401k. And so I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit, what are some of the major reasons to keep your 401k, and what are some of the reasons to roll it over?
Okay. So it's a question for discussion that's similar to the annuity question, right? You could keep your 401k with your company, with the line of funds that they have. Sometimes you can annuitize your balance in your 401k. You don't see that as much as you used to, but that's sometimes possible. And so the question for most people is, do I keep my 401k where it is with my company? You are already familiar with how you log in and make changes. You're familiar with the with the investment funds or alternatives. You may be able to figure out how much you're paying for it. You may not. Your choice is whether to keep the status quo or roll it into an IRA and then make the investments on your own. And so there are a couple of things that it comes down to. Like for a lot of people, I think the framework of the 401k being set, that sometimes they have good choices, and it could be easy, right? And they'd say, okay, well, I'm just going to keep it here. And for the most part, unless it's a real small balance, the 401k and the employer are usually okay with it. The flip side is, sometimes people say, oh, you know what, there aren't good choices. And they know it's an expensive plan, and they want to have the freedom to buy the funds at a certain fund company that they want, or there are individual stocks that they want to buy. And sometimes the IRA choice is one that the retiring person is more comfortable with. And it comes down to how you'd like to invest it, and if you would want to hire somebody to invest it for you, and to manage it for you. And if you are really intent on having someone manage it for you, then it would make sense to roll to an IRA, because if you're constrained by the choices in the 401k, oftentimes it might not make sense to pay somebody. And I know that some people do that. I don't necessarily get that, but sometimes they do, and sometimes that's a real good choice. But there is one thing, we were discussing this before, there's one major reason to keep your 401k, is if you are in your 55 to 59 and a half, and you need to take distributions, you can do so from your 401k if the plan allows it. If it's your last employer, you're 55 or older when you retire from them, you could take distributions from it without paying the penalty. Whereas if you were 55 and you rolled it over to an IRA and took distributions, you would have to pay a 10% penalty, unless you use the 72T distributions.
So you want to make sure if you roll the 401k to an IRA that you've got enough other assets and enough other income to last until you're at least 59 and a half.
Right. Right.
Okay. And I think that age 55 is actually 50 for public service workers. I did a little bit of research and wrote a blog on that because I think they retire a little bit earlier sometimes. I know my brother is one, so we discussed his situation.
Right.
So that's one of the big reasons to keep your 401k if you need access to it.
Yep. And that's, I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Yeah, I can tell you anecdotally, I had a client situation that he came to us for a plan. We did all the plan, and he was 54 and a half, and he was going to need this money before 59 and a half. And I said, no, you need to keep it. You need to put it as your 401k. Just leave it alone. I know your investments aren't that great, but it's the taxes, because you're paying a 10% penalty on IRA distributions, right, that you have to consider.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing, and the rules are very, very specific. So if you're out there at home, talk with your advisor, your accountant before you go and do it, and talk with the plan people. You can't retire at 54, wait a year, and then take it. You need to be 55 when you stop, and it's got to be your last employer.
And you can't have any other 401ks out either.
Right.
It's your last one. Okay.
Right. Now, I guess with planning, you could roll other 401ks into your employer's 401k. If you had the foresight to do that before retiring.
Or you could roll other 401ks into an IRA and then just keep the current 401k.
Right.
So you've got options. You just really need to consider them.
Yep. Yeah. Anytime that you take the time to plan in advance, you typically have options. That's the whole thing, trying to get people to plan in advance.
Yep, that's the hard part, and again, and to stick with it.
Right.
And so real quick, going back to the fees thing, because that's a huge issue for me, and I know you as an advisor, as a fiduciary, when we look at a client's 401k, we're looking, what are you paying in fees? What type of funds do you have? Are they active, passive? Are they performing, not performing? And I think one of the biggest things to take away, Wealth Masters out there, is the fees are not necessarily easy to find, although they're easier now than they were in years past. But you've really got to dig deep.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's hard. It's very hard to make I don't know if you can make an apples to apples comparison because it's very difficult to find all of the fees that you're paying, and whether your employer is shouldering any of them or not. It's really hard to know. Like you said, it was impossible to know 10 years ago, but it's still hard to know now. And it's a little bit better, and fees have come down in them, which is a good thing. 10 years ago we would see almost absurd sounding fees in 401k plans. A lot of times now they're actually really pretty good. And so it's a big thing to consider. How much is it going to cost to keep it there, versus what you would do, and if you do something on your own, what would the cost of the funds or the investments that you would buy, and then if you're going to have someone manage it, what is their cost, and then how does that line up with what you're trying to achieve, and is that something that makes sense to you or not? And people differ on that.
And Mike, you had mentioned there may be some, or we talk about fees in the 401k, there may be some fees or costs that the employer would bear. I think most 401ks, the participants actually pay the lion's share of the fees, right?
Yeah.
So let me get this straight here. Let's say I retire at 60 and I leave my 401k alone. I'm actually paying for the participants in my old 401k's fees to some extent, right? Because I'm paying that normal prorated amount that's getting spread out across all the participants.
Yeah, I don't know though that it would be any, I don't.
Because you're paying the record-keeping fee, you're paying the custodial fee, you're paying
right. Yeah, I never thought about it that way before. Yeah, all those costs that are passed along, So again, we always think about like the fees for like the funds, right? And then we sometimes think about like what other layers there are, but yeah, those specific fees that you just mentioned are fees that are paid, by the
participants,
ultimately the employee, the investors, and they're passed around. That's absolutely right.
And the advisor fee too, because most plans will have a professional advisor, and they're going to charge a certain fee to the plan. So I could be 10 years removed from this old employer and still paying all these fees and not getting any value out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Just another thing to think about, I guess. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just say that I retired and 56, and I rolled it over to an IRA, and I made a huge mistake. Mike, is there any way that I can fix this?
Yeah. So you could take distributions through Rule 72T. You would need to make distributions substantially equal periodic payments, and you need to make them until age 59 and a half, or for 5 years, whichever is longer. So if you're 56, you need to take distributions. You have to do so for 5 years until you're 61, and then there's 3 different ways of figuring out those distributions. And it's not something we do all that often. I think I've done one of those calculations in the last 20 years. But yeah, if you mess up, you can go back and fix that. And so that there's no 10% penalty. You just pay the regular income taxes like you would if you were over 59 and a half.
It's just complex, takes some planning. Probably your accountant's going to have to sign off on it as well, maybe.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I know those 72T calculations can be very complex. So, all right, Mike, why don't you go ahead and bring it home, and let's just talk about, if there is only 1 or 2 or 3 things that you want the viewers to get out of this discussion, to take the annuity or to take the lump sum. Just kind of bring it home and share those thoughts with us.
Sure. What I'd say is that there's no right answer. There might be a right answer for you, but there's no right answer, and so they need to take stock of their situation. Go through the different pros and cons that we talked about or listened, and try to make the decision that makes sense for them. Look, I'm biased. I think most people would do better with the help of a professional fiduciary advisor. And if you do that, then the lump sum probably makes sense more often than it would if you didn't have that access to that advice. But yeah, I would say don't make the decision based on what the Wall Street Journal says you should be doing. Base it on your situation. And don't feel like it's a moral thing that this Protestant work ethic thing that we have to do this certain thing. Take stock of your whole situation and make the choice that's right for you and your family.
Okay. And, real quick before we get into contact details for you, a little bit about what I know you do as a fiduciary planner, and I know all of our NAPFA cohorts. NAPFA is the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, and it's a group of fee-only financial fiduciaries across the country, and actually probably across the world. But one of the things that I wanted to mention and get your take on this, I feel it's ultra critical for somebody in this position to make a decision that they model the 2 options against each other in the context of their overall financial plan. Because I think what they'll see is as they plug in, well, what if I live till 95? What if I die at 75? Where am I going to take Social Security? When do I defer to Social Security till 70? All of these pieces of the puzzle are so intricate and so complex that I think people need to really take a step back and think about, if you don't have an advisor, if you don't want an advisor, at least consider getting somebody to do a plan for you. Mike, your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I love the idea, and I don't think I've no one that of all the people that have come into the office over the years and that we've had this discussion with, I don't think that any of them have looked at it in terms of like how does it fit in with the rest of their plan. For them, it's always this question of, do I take the lump sum or the annuity? Am I going to mess up the lump sum, or is the annuity going to be enough? And I can't reverse this decision. But I think that if you put it in the context of like, okay, this is how old I am, this is what our cash flow needs are. That I might live to 70, might live to 90, all those different things. I think that's great, Greg. I really think that's good advice. And it's, like I said, I've been doing this 20 years, and I don't think anyone's ever come in and said to me, that's what they did, and can I help with some of the assumptions, or what do you think about this? It's never like that. I think too often it comes down to like a gut decision, and
right.
Sometimes the gut, especially in investing, the gut is not often the right
yeah.
organ to use.
Or what their buddy did, or their, the girl in the cubicle next to them. Oh, well, Jan took the lump sum, so I'm going to take it. Or, John took the annuity. I think people get stuck into that, and they hear the water cooler talk, and that's just what they're going to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I talked to a client last week who's an electrician, and he said, they sit around at lunchtime, and he said, none of them thinks they need a lawyer, none of them thinks they need an accountant, none of them think.
Right.
He said, listen, I know how to do electricity, and that's what I do. And that's why I come to you to help with these other things. I told him, yeah, and I don't do my electrical. I'm not going to blow up my house.
I know that if I really wanted to, I could install a new water heater if mine busted. I don't know how long it would last or when it would explode, but I am not even going to tackle that.
No.
Yeah. So, Mike, I know you work with clients in your hometown, and I know you also work virtually, correct?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. So if we have some questions from the viewers out there and they want to get a hold of you and chat a little bit further, how can they do that, Mike?
Sure. They could shoot me an email at mgary@yardleywealth.net. It's easy enough to find our website if you Google, Mike Gary or Michael Gary. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that stuff. Any of the different social media channels. Just give us a call.
I know you are all over LinkedIn because I see you on LinkedIn every time that opens up on my phone. There's Mike Gary, and he's got another good post for me to read, so I love it.
Well, that's good. I'm glad it's not Mike Gary.
No. Michael, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. So, Wealth Masters, I always say if you don't control your money, it will control you. Same thing goes with whether to take the annuity or the pension, whether to roll the 401k or keep it. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider. I personally feel the most important thing you can do is get a qualified professional financial fiduciary who can create a plan for you, because without having a plan and mapping out all the intricacies of your retirement money, you're just never really going to have, in my opinion, the confidence to make the good decisions and to stick with them. So either you control your money or it will control you. I prefer you're the former, not the latter. Michael, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us about the annuity option or the lump sum.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. It's been great.
All right, this is Greg Phelps for the Wealth Summit, signing off.